Hello, everyone. Very warm welcome again from the enmacc offices here in Munich. And yeah, we are starting with episode 27 today. We want to elevate the topic of weather from the topic of small talks to the science behind energy prices and their forecasts. I think everyone is aware, be it in power or in gas trading, of the importance of good weather forecasts, specifically in the winter season. This is why we have invited Girmes to us. He's the founder and managing director of Energy Weather and one of the leading experts when it comes to explaining what's ahead of us. And this will be the focus of this talk. So what can we expect for the end of this winter, any special events, and we'll look as well a little bit broader on the topic, understanding from his view how to best use weather data, weather predictions as a trader. As always, you're invited to contribute. Use the Q&A functionality of Zoom and put your questions in there. I will pick them up and we have a dialogue after the short presentation to address as well your topics and your questions. And now I'm handing over. Robin, the floor is yours. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jens. And thank you for the opportunity to contribute to that great series of conversations. Today, I pick up, let's say, a headlight, which is quite often in the news, and especially towards the UK, quite frequently used wording for late winter cold spell, so-called beast from the east. And I want to relate it a bit, put it into perspective on what is that feature, what does it look like, what is the typology, why is it feared in the energy market, how often does it occur, how likely is it to appear this year for the remainder of the season, also with look on the, let's say, tight situation in gas reservoirs. Could be of interest maybe to have a thought on that. So I would start just in comparing. So from my meteorological point of view, a real beast from the east setup has taken place end February 2018. You see here 4 differing, very colorful maps. To the left, the 2 ones highlighting the weather situation at that period. It's here highlighting the day with the maximum of that weather situation, 28th of Feb. To the left, it's a pressure map. The more red, the higher the pressure, the greenish or more blue, the coloring, it is low pressure. And you see there's quite a contrast, and high pressure in the north, low pressure in the south of Europe, with a common type of how Girmes is turning around the pressure systems. This is translating to an easterly current. And that easterly current has been exceptionally strong at that period due to the high gradient. It was an unusually strong Scandinavian high. And this one allowed kind of storm force easterly winds. And to the right of that map, you see the same situation, but for Girmes temperature. Girmes meaning the temperature in 1.5 kilometers. It is not that sensitive to daytime, nighttime heating and cooling. So we meteorologists use that as a level to find more about the character of the Girmes, which is advected. So in this tape, in this situation, it was not just an easterly wind, it also had access to unusually cold Girmes from Russia, which was therefore pushed into Central Europe, even that far west as the British Isles, with lake effect in wide parts of eastern England, delivering 20, 30, 40 centimeters of snow, which not every Englishman is used to, especially in traffic. So it was a kind of very unusual situation and felt like being way too late for the season. And it was really worth to be named Beast from the East. As an alternative to the right, you see the setup from last year, which also was in some sources named Beast from the East. But you see, even in the coloring from the pressure pattern, the high pressure is way weaker, the low as well. It is even missing in one part over Spain. So it's not a direct easterly current, it's more northeast, which is not really better in winter regarding temps, but the gradient was not more than 60 hectopascal between those two types of pressure systems. It was less than 40. So it was a bit lacking that storm attribute. So it was very cold. It was very cold air mass. You see it kind of comparable to the 3 years previous event, but it was especially lacking that strong effect of wind chill. And therefore, it was also not able to make it that far southwest through France, through the British Isles, covering Ireland. And from that point of view, it was a bit weaker. From my perspective, it was hardly a beast. Just to come into maybe more common parameters from the weather point of view, again, comparing 2018 to 21. To the left, you see highlighted with that black surrounding line, those areas which had a maximum temperature end of Feb of less than 0. So freezing day, even at noon in the west parts of Ireland, which is not very usual even in Jan. But you also note to the right, 5 days later, it was even in Central Europe that mild as 12, 14 degrees, covering all of France, most of Western Germany, Benelux. So it was obviously a short-lived event. And that short-lived event also was a character last year. Last year is one difference obvious. You see here for the coda of those two pictures for the 11th of Feb. It's not that far westerly spread with the cold, but a bit tighter gradient to the south. For example, in southern half of France. One day earlier, it was in northern France. Another day earlier, it was in Benelux and northern western Germany, and brought quite a lot of snow, as it was an air mass boundary, which was weather active, like snowfall, followed by cold air mass. It was felt like really a beast, but it wasn't. Nevertheless, it was a very cold period, lasting also for 4 days stretch in most of northern and western Germany. A bit further east, it was a bit longer. Nevertheless, it was later on warming that intense as never observed before. In some regions, for example, in North Rhine-Westphalia, it was a jump by nearly data minimum within that beast, and maximum 5 days later, it was more than 30 degrees warming. So it was really massive. So obviously, it is not a weather pattern for a long period in both of these events. And it makes maybe sense to have a look into statistics, comparing it to others. Result of both was, in comparing those data by AXI, was about a drop by 7% of reservoir storages within a week. And that, of course, would have a different outcome this year compared to last year or 2018, with higher levels begin Feb or end of Jan as we are now. So having here a view on statistics, sorry, it's not that very large pictures, but to the left you see those negative temperature anomalies in recent 40 years. So each for Q1, January to Feb. So to the lower end of the picture, we start at 1980 and end up in the present, or in 21 at least. And I highlighted those events which were, let's say, of that weather type, a late wintry cold shot, following mildish or normal weather conditions before. It was not cold before in each of these 4 events. 2005 it appeared, 2012 a bit earlier, a bit longer lasting. Maybe some of you remember that E-word, where French prices went a bit higher, and it was nasty cold in Essen that February 2012. 2018, as just explained with that maps, and 2021, each here in temperature anomalies for Frankfurt, centered in Germany. And you can compare it to the previous some years and may note that it's a rare event. So 4 times since begin 80s that it's a cold shot all of a sudden taking place without any cold wintry period before. And that is exactly what we face this winter. There was no real wintry episode before. There was an attempt between Christmas and New Year, which was similar to last year's cold spell, quite fast removed to the warm side, to that unusual warm start into year. But there hasn't been a cold wintry setup yet. And if you compare it to historical winters, maybe this is a new feature. I don't know. It's not that significant time series yet for its persistence, but you see in the 80s, generally colder winters or also more persisting cold spells with a stretch of partly more than 2 weeks in a row being very cold. In the 90s, February and March generally are not that cold. Yeah, you see here, it was sometimes cold in the beginning of the year, also in December, but not that cold periods in February or March to follow, which was statistically also a bit unusual. And now, since 2005, from time to time, in an irregular rhythm, it is sometimes very cold. Just highlighting those 4 years. We name it analogs because that were years similar until now, but then deviating or having a certain scenario for future. It is that type of time series in the violet coloring here in the mid, which you again see for Frankfurt. It was mildish, some cold fronts, but nothing special, nothing freezing. Followed all of a sudden of the cold, either in calendar week 6 or 8 and 9. And in March, normalizing again. Yeah? So risk for follow-up cold shots is a kind of limited, at least limited to the intensity, because freezing days then from mid-March are extremely rare. Yeah? So also, therefore, the effects on gas reservoirs, of course, it is then reducing faster than norm, but given the absolute amount, not comparable to that -5, -10 degrees, which are sometimes reached in that extreme cold spells. If you then look to the right and compare those 5 years, or 5, 12, 18, and 21, in sum for Q1, the average temperature, January to March, is leveling really normal. It is not a cold winter just due to that shot. As mentioned before, it was mild. It tended to milder relatively fast in March. It was just one cold shot, causing a mildish winter to turn out normal. And just in comparison to the current 10-year mean, it is a bit colder than we are used to actually. So all years, meaning from 80 to now, there's no significant deviation, and maybe by accident, they're also in a very narrow range to each other. So it's normalish. For gas winter, not really an issue, at least if not having that low storage levels as now. So it's not a typical cold winter, which is appearing here due to a beast from the east situation or setup. Maybe we should talk about April 21, because some guys in the market actually are a bit scared about the remaining potential for this winter, and noted that April last year was a bit disturbing. It was lacking increasing gas reservoir levels on the back of a very cold settlement. And you see the weather pattern to that. So here, these are weather maps just summing up the average conditions for April. You see it in comparison to climate 81 to 10, it's given. From April 21, you see obviously more low pressure centered over Baltic states, more high pressure west of Europe, translating in northwesterly or northerly currents, and that was unusually persistent. Yeah? So facing such a feature in Q2 is quite usual. You know it as ice saints or other features, but in April last year, it was persistent for nearly all that 4-week stretch, and therefore caused an unusual cold April, 2 degrees below or more, widespread in Central Europe, also Benelux and Southeast. If you then look into that climatological aspects for April, is it special? Yes, it was special. 2021 is here, that to the very right, that brownish column. And there was just one other, I think it was 85, which was even a bit colder. But you may also note that the performance of April's temperature-wise is diverging. There are very warm settlements, and they're even gaining intensity to the warm side, but also there are some, from time to time, some colder settlements. And if you just look into wind for that period, you see a significant decrease. So what's the result? The result is that April obviously is turning more and more meridianous since the 80s. So it's really a trend, but exceptionally cold Aprils are rare. A rare event and cannot be expected this springtime for any higher likelihood than each of the usual years. It's just a larger uncertainty range. In some of those years, it was, let's say, the first month of summer. It's on the other side of that medal. So 2021's April has its own story, and that has nothing to do with anything like Beast from the East. And okay, reservoir storage levels in April last year didn't upward correct from 28% in the beginning to 26, 27 in the end of April, but they are not able, even in such a cold April, to cause further decreasing levels. We have circulation now this year. We could try to find out, using that analogies, whether the winter this year is more or less on the track to such a sudden potential cold spell, or whether it's just fading out as quite a lot of other winters started December and January mild and didn't leave that track. Yeah. So I summed up those four highlighted years, 2005, 12, 18, and 21, with their pattern, yeah, in January. And on the right, those winters which continued to stay mild. So it was in January 20, 19, 16, 8, 7, 1, and 0. So some years more. And what is obvious is that the pattern itself in advance was quite differing. That is, on the one hand, on that permanently mildish winters could be expected. It was very low pressure driven, therefore westerlies, therefore here in Scandinavia, that dark blue or violet coloring, further south, orange or red. You see in 22 so far, it's not really the same. We have way more high pressure impact, especially in Western Europe, but the tendency to low pressure in Scandinavia is triggered as well as Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. And those winters where there's a cold spell to follow, each of them four had quite a blocking situation northeast of Europe, mainly over Russia, but especially northeast of Europe. So we have here three strongly differing patterns, but this year and those cold winters at least differ in that feature. And astonishingly, each of those three setups had about a degree above normal temps in the end, but matched quite different than for the latter part. So focusing again on the cold part, the cold late winter, zooming out a bit because it was a bit too tiny for weather, just looking at Europe. So having Northern Hemisphere, you look top down to the Arctic. Here, just to the lower end of that slide, on the left side, you have Europe. To the left is America, to the right is Asia. And to see a bit between Europe and Asia, it's again orange-red coloring, indicating there was a high pressure surplus. It was too much high pressure around compared to normal. That weak low pressure indication for Central Europe, but not really substantial. The high pressure is a dominant feature. And this year, you see it right next to it. Sorry for the somewhat differing coloring, but summing up Jan so far, it is obviously deeply violet, not high pressure around, just over Europe, high pressure, but not where it's needed in the continental place for cold. As you can see to the right, temperatures here in those cold late winters have not just high pressure in Russia, they also have a large pool of very cold temps, and cold meaning cold for Kazakhstan and southern Russia, hanging around there, waiting for the correct pattern, like easterlies, to come and make it into Europe. This obviously in the right map from this year is not the case this year. So we're not just lacking the high pressure environments over Western Russia or Scandi, we're also lacking a significant cold pool. Cold pool this winter instead is taking place over Alaska, now expanded into Canada and partly into the US. And this is exactly the contrary setup. Contrary for that reason, if there's quite a lot of cold air mass making it in the warm Gulf Stream waters in the coast of the US or Canada. This is like starting the engine. And starting the engine meaning low pressure systems gaining size, gaining intensity, westerlies come into play. The pattern so far was more or less northwesterly for Jan. So it was therefore, besides the first 3 days, quite a normalish setup for temps, even cool for France. But now it's starting the engine, let's name it this way. And therefore the outlook as presented by the EC long-term run here in the mid, this is the outlook for February, is quite mildish. You see here, this is temperature anomaly in the upper picture. You see from Spain, crossing Central Europe, through Western Russia, everywhere it's clearly milder than normal in expectation. And as the engine, the cold over Greenland from Northern America, introducing a stronger Iceland low and westerlies, full force. This is what can be seen now in the maps for calendar week 5 and 6, which is relatively obvious now. And for uncertain persistence, but clearly giving us far off any access to cold. Access to cold, then from Arctic maybe, a cold front, but not the beast from the east pattern. High pressure nowhere around to make it up to Scandi. And this is exactly the pattern below. The pattern here for this winter indicating for Feb, high pressure dominance to persist for Western Europe, maybe a bit pushed down compared to the January picture, so allowing more westerlies. But again, if westerlies would fade out, it is more likely to end up in high pressure second half of Feb, for example, would mean as well more sunshine, less fog than in recent some weeks, and therefore as well higher daytime temps at least. Nighttime temps, of course, could be cold even in a high pressure environment and Feb. But it's completely uncertain whether really the westerlies will give up after that forecast horizon, which is obvious now. So it could also just materialize the way as shown here, as westerlies in those purely mild winters just continue. You see that stretch of low pressure just hanging around in Northern Europe, high pressure accompanying in Southwest, not too different, and the mildish output as well. And this is strongly in contrast to the stuff used for beast from the east or late wintry cold snaps. So from that point of view, in late winters, beast from the east is generally a rare and a short-lived weather pattern. There were 4 historical events after that mildish December and Jan, which each caused Q1 just to turn out normal, not cold. And the setup in 22 is clearly lacking both necessary conditions for a late winter cold spell, a cold reservoir over southern Russia, and an easterly pattern initiated by Scandi high or Western Russian high. Yeah, so from that point of view, not too dangerous for gas yet.
Very good. Thanks for the presentation. Now we are ready to have some more questions around the topic. What I just picked up here, the first questions coming in, they connected all to a little bit a longer term perspective. So if we have these anomalies happening or not happening in a way, you have seen as well or shown as well that you call it the uncertainty is widening between these events. What does that mean for the mid to longer term predictions for the weather we have? Do we see there as well global warming effects? And can we get more accurate with these more extreme events happening?
I quite a while suggested April to be the month with the clearest climate warming signal. Mm-hmm. April has a feature so-called end April warming, where all of a sudden from about the 20th, there's a jump in temps to a level which is then a kind of the coolish summer level to persist until late September, early October. And that end April warming stepwise forward progressed in some of those very warm Aprils. Yeah? Those settlements, which were very warm, had that so-called end April warming always a bit earlier. Sometimes in some of these years, even from begin April, it was 22, 25 degrees each day, and therefore felt like summer. But I did not recognize that there's also that decreasing trend in temps on the cold side. And both sides were generally with not that much of wind. So the decreasing wind trend is maybe the more significant one than here an increasing or decreasing temp trend for April anymore.
So it gets more difficult, or you see it more converging to a pattern if you look more to longer term?
Yeah, of course you could try to relate it to climate change. If I would do so, I would say, okay, and winter, low gradients, water temps, land surface, then it depends a bit on what about Gulf Stream, what about circulation? Is it more westerly generally in winters, or is it then turning more meridional like here? And this clearly tends over, let's say, decades to a bit more meridionality, being able then into Q2 before the real summer circulation is picking up. But I wouldn't be too pushy on have a clear trend, especially for April. April is in between winter and summer, and same as October, maybe the hardest part for long-term forecasts in a year.
So maybe diving a little bit deeper into that, are there clear forecasting horizons you use? So is it more the weekly versus the monthly forecast, or is this actually a continuum you're looking at? And how should traders work with this actually?
I think you leave quantitative trading forecasts horizons clearly with that 15, 16-day stretch, which is covered by the daily updating weather models. There are attempts to prolong that forecast horizon, which is on a daily basis, even with the American weather model for 42 days and so on. But the, let's say, confidence level is very limited. Yes? And so even in strong developments, it's not really able to pick up, let's say, something reliable on the quantitative part. Qualitatively, partly. Yeah? So you have some of the models indicating stuff for the stratosphere, which could be, as a development, a bit in advance. On the other side, as a meteorologist, you have the chance to, for example, as done here, look into similar years, into analogs. You can try to relate so-called teleconnections to the current pattern. So like El Nino, La Nina, NAO, whatever there's called, it's teleconnection. And they are, some of them with a long persistence. And out of that long persistence and typical correlations of deviation from normal, you can try to find out a pattern. There's one problem. The most reliable of that is NAO, North Atlantic Oscillation, the dependency between Iceland low and Azores high, or the measurement for our westerlies. And this has the lowest forecast reliability over a horizon of more than 14 days of all of these teleconnections. So from that point of view, it doesn't always help out. It's just the tendency, and there's always a chance to get a completely different direction out of NAO. Having said that, there's quite a lot of seasonal forecasting around, and yeah, from time to time, you really have a good winter in forecasting. Yeah? It's possible, but surprises as well.
So we had this question here, for explicitly the beast of the East, when would be the earliest indicator that you're saying it's likely to happen? What could be kind of a, when would you make the first comment on, hey, there's a probability it happens?
Yeah, it's a weather feature. Yeah, it's a weather feature. Yeah, so generally, you have a special type of circulation. For example, this winter, polar vortex, which is determining for us in Northern Hemispherical winter, is weak. Yeah, it had a hard job to make it into anything like normal until end of year. Now it's always being pushed around by that high and not really making it as westerly. Also had a very hard job in North America for climate change reasons because of late freezing in Hudson Bay. But there was a typical pattern this winter, and this is small-scale polar vortex, and this doesn't seem to break up anymore until the end of winter. Now just allowing a bit more westerlies due to the cold, making it now finally on the Gulf Stream waters, but it's also at risk with that strong high to retreat a bit faster with its impact on the continent again. So this is just the general tendency. What we do not have is a tendency to Scandinavian high. And that would be, for example, an early indication if you would have a general setup repeating here and there Scandinavian high, maybe not persisting, you should be a bit more careful on that further ups for the late winter. But this winter is really not good period for Scandinavian high so far.
I like it a lot how you make this kind of create these narratives around how you explain that. I mean, this is you interpreting an enormous mass of data and models and looking a little bit behind that. I mean, most of as well energy trading companies are basically working with the same data. Is that right? Or the same models in there? And can you explain that a little bit, how your work fits into that?
Yes, of course. So it is common market knowledge to look at 4 model outputs out of 2 groups of models. Meteorologists also look deeper into detail for quite some more models, but market is not trading on them, due to maybe the leading platforms generally using that 2 families and 4 models. On the prompt end, there's quite a lot of more diversity from models. They are more short-lived. They have just a forecast horizon of 48, 60, 72 hours, something like that. But the more decisive for example, for gas traders is temperature, and temperature has a good forecast, even 8-9 days in advance. And then the amount of available models is reducing. So data is the same, yes, but it's for a meteorologist always a 2-dimensional thing. Quite a lot of traders trading time series, the 1 dimension. And that of course makes sense because it's determining your residual load, your price on power or gas. But me as a meteorologist with some, let's say, experience I'm having a different look. For example, whether there's strong winds due to a large-scale low centered over Scandi or Scotland, or is it just a secondary low just passing and therefore way higher uncertainty range within that 40 gig wind power forecast? And this is something maybe which is one of those reasons where meteorologists are absolutely needed at handling larger positions. The confidence or to figure out the differing confidence at certain weather pattern. Is the wind about to come? Is a cold front about to come? And so on.
Are you saying we have already 10 days ahead? We have already a pretty good view on let's say on the normal conditions.
Yeah, on temperature development. So standard deviation here, day-on-day changes is smaller than the mistake. And for wind is, I think, after 5 days, the day-to-day change is smaller than the standard deviation of the mistake. So forecast horizon, I define it that way, and this is for wind just 4 or 5 days, and for temperatures more than 8.
Which could give good reason not to trade just the full volumes in the full volatility of the spot markets, but maybe sorting things earlier, no? And
maybe
dealing with less volatility here on the price side.
Yes, and maybe it's worth mentioning that the parameters are not independently. So if wind power is not very reliable, but temperature, you don't have warm temperatures in Jan without wind. Sometimes it's cold with wind, maybe it's from the east situation, but in general, you don't have warm temps without winds from December to Feb. So you can try to bypass that unreliable wind power forecast.
Yeah. So to transition that already, your types of customers become much more diverse now as well, from renewables, solar, wind. I just got a question here as well around the effects on hydrogen. I haven't thought about that, honestly. But is this really determining your work, how you work together with traders?
Yes, it is.
Very specific.
So it is, on the one hand, a broader diversity of market participants, customers, but on the other side as well, changing setup for the relevance of parameters. Just named hydro. This is not that fast changing, but I can't remember to see such an important print of hydropower comparing the power prices as in this year's Gen. We had quite a lot of water around at year's change, and a relative similar setup for power demand in France in calendar week 2 didn't realize high prices, but in this week it was really expensive, and yeah, hydropower lost some gigs of run-of-river production. And for that point of view, it was a bit tighter. So it's each of the 4 parameters: wind, precipitation, radiation for solar, and temperature, of course, which are important. And each country is differing, and each country is changing year on year. For example, actually, Poland is just installing like hell what is ever is possible in PV, obviously. Same for Netherlands. So their behavior in the market is changing very rapidly as well.
Yeah. I mean, especially on the gas side, we had, I think, more than ever before discussions around the demand in even Asia, China. I mean, it becomes a global input to price predictions. Is this becoming more of an issue that your customers want to have a global perspective on trends and effects?
Yeah, we observe that. We observe that for coal, for example, with that ongoing La Nina and some issues with flooding in the minings and some higher demand in some of those regions affected in the Northern Hemisphere. For gas, it's at least it was last year, yeah, following JKM due to our low reservoir storages, the Asian market price index, always with just a tiny gap out of the risks. And now this year, it's maybe a competition between Asia and Europe, how to reach that gas.
I like to pick up one question here directly because I like it a little provocative here. What does a meteorologist know that traders cannot see, know from themselves? So,
as mentioned, that's two-dimensional stuff, especially. Yeah, I know some traders which are very experienced in that. And they use meteorologists for partly a bit different purpose. They are able to read weather maps, but they talk with the meteorologists partly just in listening to the way they talk, on determining the confidence level, not by what he's saying, but how he's saying. So that is another factor which could be important to use meteorologists.
So sharing the same outlook, but then discussing confidence level.
Yeah, and sometimes it really makes sense to have the global view of the circulation as a meteorologist, to be aware of what is about to happen, also in the perspective of the differing neighboring countries. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How's your professional role there changing with AI or other machine learning algorithms, which may come with predictions which don't allow for this nice narrative anymore, because you don't know exactly how these were derived? What would you see is this evolving in the next years?
I think AI is very good in everything which market is used to. But there's one problem. Weather is responsible for several events per year, which are very, let's say, non-linear. Mm-hmm. And with that behavior, maybe as well an issue for most of AI approaches. For example, that spike in prices in October led to high day-ahead settlements, and most AI sources which I followed, I heard about, also had that bias then 2 or 3 days later on, still expecting very high price settlements because it was a bit unexpected before. So learning algorithm, of course, they will continue to learn and also know more and more about that sudden events. But for the time being, I think exactly that non-linearity and therefore the reaction on the market also being partly extreme is one thing we are still ahead of AI.
Good. So you're not afraid for your job. And I think most of the traders will take away that we are altogether not too much afraid of a beast from the east this year. So we can much more focus our attention on the geopolitical influences we may see, which are probably as well not independent of the weather. But thanks a lot. It was a very interesting deep dive into the topic, and I think gave us all a kind of a good outlook for what may come this winter. Good. Thanks a lot, Robin. Thanks for everyone participating in the session. We'll be back, I think, in 2 or 3 weeks already with the next topic. As always, you will announce it via email or on LinkedIn or other channels you have access to. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.